Have you ever wondered how a family so mighty, with dragons at their command and the Iron Throne beneath their rule, could nearly destroy itself from within? Tonight, we travel back to an age of fire and blood, to witness a war unlike any other in the annals of Westeros. A war where brother fought sister, kin turned upon kin, and dragons, the very symbols of Targaryen power, were set against each other in a deadly struggle that scorched the realm. This is the tale of the Dance of the Dragons, the Targaryen civil war that shattered a dynasty and left scars upon the Seven Kingdoms that would never truly heal. Where are you watching from, and what hour is it in your world? Here, in the pages of history, the hour is grim. The banners of war are rising, the Iron Throne trembles beneath the weight of ambition, and the skies themselves burn. Settle in, for this is a chronicle of betrayal, of tragedy, and of fire unleashed. The reign of King Viserys. The story begins with King Viserys Targaryen, a monarch remembered as a man of peace. Viserys was not a conqueror, nor a warrior of great renown, but a king who sought stability, prosperity, and unity for the realm. His reign was marked by feasts, tournaments, and the flourishing of art and learning. Westeros knew decades of relative calm under his rule, and for a time it seemed the Seven Kingdoms had entered a golden age. Yet beneath this veneer of peace lay the seeds of future strife. For though Viserys ruled with a gentle hand, he was faced with the most perilous question any monarch must answer. Who shall inherit the throne after me? The Iron Throne is not a seat that forgives hesitation, and in the uncertainty of succession, chaos is born. Viserys had no son in the early years of his reign. His beloved wife, Queen Aemma, bore him only one surviving child, a daughter, Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen. In her, Viserys placed his hopes. Bold, intelligent, and proud, Rhaenyra was the apple of her father's eye, and from her earliest days she was treated as his chosen successor. In the year 105 AC, Viserys went so far as to formally declare her his heir, a decision unprecedented in the history of the Targaryen dynasty. Before the court and the lords of the realm, oaths were sworn to uphold her right to rule after her father's passing. But fate is never so simple. The queen who never was, and the question of succession. The Targaryens had faced the question of female succession before. Years earlier, when King Jaehaerys convened the Great Council of 101 AC to decide who should succeed him, the lords of Westeros rejected the claim of Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was, in favor of her male cousin. Viserys, though Rhaenys had the stronger claim by blood, the realm had not been ready to accept a woman upon the Iron Throne. That precedent weighed heavily upon the lords of Westeros, and upon those who whispered in the shadows of Viserys' court. Still, Viserys pressed on, determined that his beloved daughter would inherit after him. He groomed Rhaenyra for queenship, granting her honors, a place on the small council, and the companionship of powerful allies. Yet the seeds of doubt had already been sown in the hearts of many. Alicent Hightower and the birth of rival claims. After the death of Queen Aemma, Viserys remarried. His second wife was Alicent Hightower, daughter of Sir Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King. This union would prove fateful, for Alicent bore Viserys' sons, first Aegon, then Aemond, and later Daron. With the birth of these princes, the question of succession once more hung heavy in the air. Should the Iron Throne pass to Rhaenyra, the king's firstborn child and named heir, or should it pass to Aegon, the firstborn son of the king's second marriage, a boy whose claim was backed by centuries of tradition that favored males over females? Viserys was unwavering. To him, there was no question. Rhaenyra remained his heir. He had sworn it. The lords of the realm had sworn it, and he would not be moved. But to others, especially Queen Alicent and her supporters, the matter was far from settled. The court of King's Landing became divided into factions, two rival camps that would come to be known as the Blacks and the Greens. The Blacks rallied behind Princess Rhaenyra, their symbol the black of House Targaryen sigil. The green stood behind Queen Alicent and her son Aegon, named for the green gown she had worn at a great tourney to signal her defiance. From this simple division of color, a rivalry would grow into a tempest that would engulf the realm. Rhaenyra. The realm's delight, Rhaenyra herself was no meek claimant. Called the realm's delight in her youth for her beauty, charm, and spirited nature, she inspired loyalty and devotion. She rode the dragon Syrax, golden-scaled and fierce, and carried herself with the pride of her Valyrian blood. Yet she also bore a streak of stubbornness, quick to anger, and unwilling to forgive slights. Her marriage to Sir Lanor Velaryon, heir to the wealthiest and most powerful house in Westeros, only strengthened her position. The Velaryons commanded the might of the seas, their fleets unrivaled. With Lanor at her side, and the might of House Velaryon pledged to her cause, Rhaenyra seemed destined to inherit the throne without challenge. But whispers haunted her marriage. The children born of their union, Jaehaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey, bore little resemblance to Lyanna, but much to Sir Harwin Strong, rumored to be Rhaenyra's lover. The legitimacy of her sons became a subject of scandal, seized upon by her rivals as proof that she was unfit to rule. The growing divide. Meanwhile, Queen Alicent and her supporters nurtured the claim of her eldest son, Prince Aegon. Handsome, reckless, and indulgent, Aegon was not seen by many as a wise ruler in the making. Yet he was a male of pure Targaryen blood, and to those who valued tradition above all else, that was enough. His brother Aemon was a different matter. Stern, ambitious, and relentless, he would become one of the most dangerous players in the coming war. The rival factions grew ever more entrenched, each side gathering allies, making marriages, and preparing for the inevitable. Though King Viserys forbade any talk of disinheritance or rebellion, he could not silence the whispers in the halls of the Red Keep, nor the mutterings in the great houses of Westeros. When he gathered his court to dine in his later years, it was said the blacks and the greens sat at opposite sides of the hall, glaring at one another across the tables, their enmity plain for all to see. The shadow of war. Thus, the seeds of the dance were planted long before the first sword was drawn. A realm divided, oaths sworn and soon to be broken, dragons waiting in their lairs for the summons of war. All that remained was the spark to set the blaze. That spark would come with the death of King Viserys, and with it, the realm would descend into chaos. The Usurpation. The death of King Viserys, in the 49th year of his reign. King Viserys Targaryen drew his final breath. He had grown old, feeble, and afflicted by ailments that sapped his strength. The once robust king, who had presided over decades of peace, was reduced to a frail shadow, kept alive by milk of the poppy and the will to see his line endure. When he passed, the Iron Throne was left in a perilous state. Viserys' death, like the strike of a hammer upon steel, set the cracks of division shattering through the realm. He had made his wishes plain. His daughter Rhaenyra was his heir. Yet the king's body was scarcely cold before those wishes were betrayed. The council in the dark, Queen Alicent Hightower and her father, Sir Otto Hightower, hand of the king, acted swiftly. Rather than announcing the death of Viserys, they kept it secret, sealing the Red Keep and summoning only those lords and knights they could trust. In the dead of night, in hidden council, they conspired to crown Prince Aegon, eldest son of Alicent, in Rhaenyra's place. This clandestine gathering became known as the Green Council. It was here that oaths were cast aside, that treachery was forged into policy. Some lords protested, reminding the council of their sworn vows to Princess Rhaenyra. One such man, Lord Beesbury, master of coin, rose in defiance, declaring their plot treason. His reward was a swift death, silence forever at the council table. The rest bent the knee to the Greens or held their tongues in fear. The decision was made. Prince Aegon would be crowned king. Aegon's reluctance, yet even Aegon himself was not eager for the crown. a young man of pleasure, more interested in wine, women, and hunting than in matters of state. He was said to be reluctant to take upon himself the burden of kingship. It was his mother Alicent and his grandsire Sir Otto who pressed him forward, reminding him that if Rhaenyra were to take the throne, his own life and the lives of his brothers and sisters would be in mortal peril. For Rhaenyra could not allow rivals to her claim to live. Thus, under pressure and persuasion, Aegon was made ready to ascend. The crown of the conqueror. The day of his coronation dawned, and in secret, Aegon was led to the sept of the dragon pit, where a great crowd had been gathered under false pretenses. There, in the sight of the lords and small folk of King's Landing, Prince Aegon was crowned with the iron crown of Aegon the Conqueror, and the great sword Blackfire was placed in his hand. The people cried out his name, and the bells of the city rang. Though some cheered out of true loyalty, many cheered out of fear, for they knew not what would follow if they refused. Yet in that moment, Aegon Targaryen was proclaimed king, and Rhaenyra's rights were stolen away. Rhaenyra at Dragonstone. Far from King's Landing, Princess Rhaenyra dwelled at Dragonstone, awaiting the birth of another child. When word reached her of her father's death and of her half-brother's coronation, her grief was mingled with fury. Betrayal, bitter and sharp, cut her to the bone. All her life she had been groomed for the throne. Her claim had been sworn before lords and ladies of the realm, and now, in her hour of mourning, it had been stolen from her. Rhaenyra's rage was said to be so great that her labor was brought on too soon. In agony and blood, she gave birth to a stillborn daughter, a babe malformed and lifeless. The tragedy hardened her heart. Dressed in black mourning, she vowed that her stolen crown would be won back in fire and blood. It was on Dragonstone that her loyal supporters rallied. The Blacks declared her queen, placing a crown upon her head, the very crown once worn by her father Viserys. Unlike her half-brother's coronation in the Dragon Pit, hers was a solemn affair, witnessed by her sons, her husband Daemon, and the lords and knights who had not forsaken their oaths. From this moment forward, the realm had two monarchs, King Aegon, seated in King's Landing, and Queen Rhaenyra, enthroned upon Dragonstone. The gathering of allies. Both sides now turned to the great houses of Westeros, seeking to win allies to their cause. The Greens held the capital, the treasury, and the loyalty of the Crownlands. They had the backing of House Hightower, one of the greatest and wealthiest houses of the realm, and the support of the Reach. Sir Criston Cole, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, lent his sword and his name to Aegon's cause, bringing with him the loyalty of many knights. The Blacks held Dragonstone and Driftmark, with the powerful Valyrian fleet under their command. They had the loyalty of the Riverlands, pledged through strong ties of marriage and blood. And above all, they had Rhaenyra's husband, Prince Daemon Targaryen, the Rogue Prince, rider of the dragon Paraxes, a man as dangerous as he was ambitious. The lines were drawn. Children of the rival houses. The children of the rival houses would also play their part in the coming storm. Rhaenyra's eldest son, Prince Jaehaerys Velaryon, known as Jace, was bold and eager, pledged to carry his mother's banners across the realm. His brother Lucerys, called Luke, though younger, was determined to prove his worth. On the other side, Queen Alicent's sons prepared for war. Aegon, the reluctant king, now sat upon the throne. His brother Aemond, fierce and ruthless, rode Vhagar, the largest and oldest living dragon, a beast that had once borne Queen Visenya herself. Where Aegon faltered, Aemond drove forward, relentless and cold. The stage was set for bloodshed, for never before in history had so many dragons been poised to fight against one another. The first blows. The war began not with grand battles, but with whispers, plots, and the sending of envoys. Both Rhaenyra and Aegon sent their children as messengers to secure alliances with the great houses of Westeros. It was a dangerous game, for even as words were spoken, swords were drawn in secret, and betrayal lay waiting in the shadows. It would be the flight of young Prince Viserys Velaryon to Storm's End, and his fateful encounter with Prince Aemond that would ignite the true war. Fire unleashed. The death at Storm's End. First true blood of the dance was spilled at Storm's End. Rhaenyra's son, Prince Viserys Velaryon, flew upon his dragon Arrax to win the allegiance of House Baratheon. Yet when he arrived, he found Prince Aegon Targaryen already there, riding the colossal Vhagar. Lord Boros Baratheon received both envoys, but tempers flared when Aemond, still nursing the wound of an eye lost years earlier in a quarrel with Viserys, demanded vengeance. Viserys fled into the storm, taking to the skies on Arrax. But the storm was wild, and Vhagar was mightier. Against the will of his rider, the ancient she-dragon struck. In the blackness of thunder and lightning, Arrax was torn apart, and Viserys with him. The boy's body was never found. When word of his death reached Dragonstone, Rhaenyra was said to collapse in grief, her cries echoing through the halls. But grief soon hardened into rage. She swore vengeance upon Aemond and upon all who had stolen her crown. The dance of the dragons had begun. Blood and cheese. Daemon Targaryen, ever ruthless, answered Viserys' death with cruelty. In King's Landing, he employed cutthroats, men known only as Blood and Cheese, to strike at the heart of Aegon's line. They crept into the Red Keep under cover of darkness and seized Queen Helaena, Aegon's sister wife, along with her young children. Forced to choose which of her sons would die, Helaena was driven into madness as the assassins slaughtered her boy before her eyes. The deed sent shockwaves through the realm. It was no longer a war of claims and councils. It was a war of blood feud, of vengeance, of atrocities that would stain both sides. The small folk began to whisper that the gods themselves had turned away from the Targaryens, for kin had turned against kin with monstrous cruelty. The battle for Harrenhal. As the storm of war spread, Harrenhal, the cursed and colossal fortress in the Riverlands, became a prize. Prince Daemon swept upon it with cuiraxes, and the castle yielded without a fight. From Harrenhal, Daemon waged a campaign of terror across the Riverlands, striking at the Green's allies and sowing chaos. The Riverlords, long resentful of Hightower influence, bent their knees to Rhaenyra's cause. From Harrenhal, the rogue prince became a shadow of dread, a reminder that dragons gave not just power, but the power to devastate whole regions in fire. The Battle of Rook's Rest. The war's first great clash of dragons came at Rook's Rest, a castle sworn to Rhaenyra. Lord Stanton held the fortress for the Blacks, but Sir Criston Cole, the Kingmaker, marched with Aegon's forces to bring it down. Rhaenyra's ally, Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was, took to the skies upon her dragon, Meleys, the Red Queen. Fierce and fearless, Rhaenys descended upon the Green's army, scattering soldiers in flame. But from the skies came not one, but two foes. Aegon II himself rode Sunfire, a dragon of gleaming gold, while Aemond descended on mighty Vhagar. Three dragons clashed in a storm of fire and death. Meleys fought valiantly, her jaws closing around Sunfire, tearing at his flesh. But the combined might of Sunfire and Vhagar proved too great. Meleys fell, crashing into the castle below, and Princess Rhaenys perished in the flames. The death of Rhaenys was a grievous blow to the Blacks. Yet the Greens paid dearly as well. Sunfire was savaged, his wing torn and his body broken, while King Aegon himself was terribly burned, left crippled and in agony. Thereafter, Aegon could no longer rule unaided. His brother Aemond, unscathed and hungry for power, stepped forward to lead in his stead. The realm in flames. The dance spread like wildfire. In the Crownlands, villages were burned, fields destroyed, and small folk trampled beneath dragonfire. The Riverlands descended into brutal feuding as houses turned against one another. In the Reach and the Westerlands, lords chose sides, some for ambition, others for survival. It was said that never had so many dragons flown to war. In those years, The skies of Westeros were alive with wings of flame. Yet dragons were not merely weapons, they were living creatures, unpredictable and willful. When loosed in battle, their destruction was beyond imagining. Whole hosts of men were reduced to ash in moments, castles shattered, and towns erased from the map. What had begun as a struggle for succession was consuming the very realm itself. The battle at the Gullet. On the seas, too, war raged. The Blacks, backed by the Valyrian fleet, sought to choke off King's Landing from trade and supply. The Greens answered by calling upon the might of Old Town and the Lannisters of the Westerlands. At the Gullet, the narrow waters between Dragonstone and Driftmark, one of the greatest naval battles in Westerosi history was fought. Ships burned as dragonfire rained upon them. Princes Jaehaerys Velaryon, Rhaenyra's heir, led the charge upon his dragon Vermax. But amid the chaos, Vermax was struck by a storm of arrows and bolts. Wounded, the dragon plunged into the sea, taking Jaehaerys with him. The death of Jace was a crushing blow to Rhaenyra and to her cause. The Blacks mourned their young prince, while the Greens rejoiced, for each dragon slain weakened their enemy's grip on power. The small folk turned as the war dragged on. The suffering of the common people grew unbearable. Crops burned, trade halted, and famine spread. To the small folk of King's Landing, dragons were no longer symbols of majesty, but of terror. The city groaned under the weight of refugees, rumor, and fear. Murmurs grew of rebellion, of striking against both kings and queens alike. For the Targaryens had unleashed their dragons upon one another, and in doing so, had unleashed ruin upon the very people they claimed to rule. Toward doom, by the war's second year, both factions were bloodied, yet neither had prevailed. The Blacks held strong in Dragonstone and the Riverlands, while the Greens still commanded King's Landing. But the toll of the war was mounting. Sons and daughters lay dead, dragons lay broken, and the realm itself smoldered. It was only a matter of time before the war would reach its terrible climax, when dragon would meet dragon in battles so fierce they would scar the histories forever. And in the shadows of fate, Daemon Targaryen prepared to face his greatest foe, Aemond One-Eye and Mighty Viger. Ashes and aftermath. The prince and the rogue. The war. This most fateful clash came at last in the skies above the goddess Eye, the vast lake that lay at the heart of the Riverlands. There, two of the mightiest dragons of the age met in battle. Daemon Targaryen upon Caraxes, the lean red beast called the Bloodworm, and Prince Aemond upon Viger, the colossal she-dragon who had once borne Queen Visenya. For months, Aemond had ranged across the Riverlands, leaving death and fire in his wake, seeking to break the Black cause with terror. Daemon would not allow it. He lured his foe to Harrenhal, then gave chase into the skies above the lake. Before the eyes of fisherfolk and farmers far below, the dragons collided in a storm of fire and fury. The battle was said to shake the very heavens. Caraxes and Viger tore at each other with tooth and claw, their roars echoing for miles. In the final moments, Daemon leapt from his saddle, plunging through the air to drive Dark's sister, his Valyrian steel blade, through Aemon's eye. Rider and dragon fell together, crashing into the waters of the god's eye. Caraxes dragged himself to the shore before dying, his belly ripped open. Vogr sank beneath the waves, her bones resting there still. Neither prince lived to tell the tale. The rogue prince and the kinslayer were no more. Their deaths marked the end of two of the greatest warriors of the dance, and though it brought no peace, it sealed the war's descent into its final, most tragic chapter. The fall of King's Landing. With Aemond dead and Aegon crippled, the Blacks turned their gaze to King's Landing. Rhaenyra, hardened by grief, mounted her black dragon Syrax and marched with her armies upon the capital. The gates were thrown open, for the people within had grown weary of war, and the queen entered the city in triumph. Upon the Iron Throne, she seated herself, draped in black, Dark sister by her side. For a fleeting moment, Rhaenyra's long struggle seemed won. She was queen, as her father had willed, as she had been promised. But her triumph was hollow. The treasury was empty, the people starved, and the small folk who once adored the realm's delight now cursed her name. Taxes and punishments weighed heavy upon them, and whispers grew that the queen cared more for her vengeance than for her realm. Worse still, dragons within the city clashed. In the dragon pit, the people, maddened by hunger and fear, rose in rebellion. They stormed the great pit, armed with stones, spears, and hatred. In their fury, they slew the dragons kept there, even as those dragons slaughtered them by the hundreds. When it ended, 4 dragons lay dead, and thousands of small folk with them. It was a horror never before seen, a sign that even the might of House Targaryen could not withstand the wrath of the common man. The last flight of Rhaenyra's rule grew desperate. Betrayals mounted, allies fell away, and her grip on the city weakened with each passing day. Finally, she was driven from King's Landing, fleeing with what few loyalists remained. But her doom had already been written. On Dragonstone, betrayed by those she trusted, Rhaenyra was seized and delivered to her half-brother, King Aegon. Her end was cruel beyond imagining. Before the eyes of her son, young Aegon the Younger, she was fed to Soundfire, the wounded yet still living dragon of Aegon. Screams filled the air as dragonfire consumed her, and when it was done, only ashes remained. Thus perished Rhaenyra Targaryen, the first woman to claim the Iron Throne, devoured by the very power that had sustained her house. Her son watched in horror, silent and broken, the memory forever burned into his soul. The last gasps of war, though Rhaenyra was gone, the dance did not end at once. Her supporters fought on, for her sons yet lived, and the realm was weary of Aegon's cruelty. The king himself was a shattered man, crippled by burns, racked by pain, and consumed by paranoia. His reign was short and bitter. In the end, he was poisoned by his own counselors, who could no longer endure his weakness and tyranny. The throne then passed to Rhaenyra's son, Aegon the Younger, who became King Aegon. But his reign was a somber one. The boy who had seen his mother devoured before his eyes grew into a man known as the Dragonbane. He presided over a kingdom broken and scarred, and under his rule, the dragons dwindled and died, never again to rise in such numbers. The cost of the dance of the dragons left House Targaryen forever diminished. Dragons, once the unchallenged masters of sky and flame, were slain in great number, their corpses strewn across fields and castles. Families were shattered, children slaughtered, and the lords of Westeros left bitter and wary. The realm had been set aflame by the ambitions of a few, and when the fires died, little remained but ash. The Targaryens still ruled, but their majesty was tarnished, their future weakened. The dance had proven that even dragons could die, and that the might of House Targaryen was not unbreakable. It was said thereafter that the dance was the beginning of the end, the first cracks in the foundation of a dynasty that would one day fall in blood and madness. Thus ends the tale of the Dance of the Dragons, a war of kin against kin, where pride and vengeance drowned a realm in fire. From the ashes, the Targaryens ruled still, but never again with the same strength, never again with the same awe. And so I ask you, listeners across the ages, what think you of this war? Was Rhaenyra wronged, or was Aegon's claim the truer? Would you have stood with the blacks or with the greens? Speak your mind in the ledger below, for history is written not only by kings, but by all who remember. If this chronicle has stirred your spirit, let your voice be heard. Leave your mark with a like, share this tale with fellow travelers of history, and subscribe that you may ride with us again when next we take wing into the past. For the dragons may be gone, but their fire still burns in story, in song, and in the memory of all who hear their tale.